Сейчас у нас последний докладчик, Гордон Эйнштейн. Он будет докладывать на английском языке. Если вы совсем ничего не понимаете, ну, можете либо учить, да, либо это, ну, как бы, там, пойти общаться с Толиком или с кем угодно. То есть он прилетел из Лос-Анджелеса, и он, кстати, прилетел, походу, вот так. Ну ладно. You can connect, yeah. Но Гордон русский немного понимает, поэтому аккуратнее. Да, и он, ну, как бы... You can connect, yeah, just here. Все, я... Was working. You need that. No, it was, yeah, it works now. Yeah. You can do it like this, okay? I will bring it to you so you can click, okay?
All right, hold on.
Take it.
One sec. What do you want? Just one second. Yeah? Let's see. All right, hold on. That's Bulgaria. Cool. People, stay, practice your English. You can do it. I came all the way from Los Angeles through Bucharest. It was hell. Okay. Привет, team. That's about as much Russian as I'm going to try tonight. No problem. Okay. So this is sort of a rehash of a presentation I gave a couple months ago in Kyiv and then in Gibraltar. How many people in the room have conducted an ICO? Raise your hands. If you have done an ICO already. How many people understand the words coming out of my mouth? Raise your hand. Who doesn't understand what I'm saying? See, trick question. Okay, how many of you want to conduct an ICO or be involved in an ICO? I just want to get that into the audience. All right, good. And how many of you are scared of the United States and its laws? Okay, congratulations, you're smart. Okay, so I can tell you, traveling around the world, that the global conversation right now, the whole world, other than I support fork log, is deciding whether or not to do an ICO and whether or not to sell tokens into the United States and get the money that's available from the United States and take advantage of or get access to US customers. And the main issue there is working through what's called United States securities laws. So in English, securities means stocks, bonds, investment contracts. And part of the question is, when you do an ICO, are the tokens that you issue United States securities, and do you need to comply with the law? Now, I just want to be sensitive to the fact I'm a fast English talker. Is this too fast, too slow? A little slower. Не проблем. У нас не проблем, друг. Хорошо? Okay, that's, I can fake Russian okay. So, all right, but thank you. I'll get the next one. Okay, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. There you go, but I'm friendly. Okay, let me just kind of be efficient here. All right, I can make these slides available to everyone. It's just a bunch of text. The main thing I want to throw out there from this slide is that here's the background that you need to have to understand United States securities laws. The laws we have were based on changes made after the Great Depression. Because in 1929, the United States stock market crashed, set off the worldwide Great Depression, and you can make a pretty strong argument that the Great Depression in the United States indirectly led to World War II. So a whole bunch of laws came into place after the Great Depression. The ones that you should recognize are the 1933 Securities Act. You'll hear that one a lot, the 1933 Securities Act. There's another one called the 1934 Securities and Exchange Act. And then the 1934 Act created the Securities and Exchange Commission, otherwise known as the SEC. So everyone's talking about the SEC, that's Securities and Exchange Commission. That's a US agency that was created in order to handle the registration and marketing of stock. Now, when people are afraid of issuing or selling their tokens into the United States, they have basically 4 options. There's an option number 1, which was popular, which is they would do an ICO and sell the tokens to the whole world, take all the money, move to Ibiza or Odessa, or Club Ibiza at Odessa, and just hide from the government. And I'd say in the early days that worked. But since I gave this presentation last a couple months ago, the SEC and the US government are looking pretty strongly at this now. The second option I see a lot of companies taking is that they avoid selling into the United States. They block United States IPs. They make people sign online saying they're not from the United States. That's kind of a safe approach, but it causes you to raise less money than you otherwise would. So if you're doing an ICO and you're selling tokens, you know, the first 2 options that everyone kind of goes with are selling to everyone and they don't care about the consequences, or just avoiding the United States because they're afraid of the law. But I want to point out that China is basically not available for ICOs now. So if you don't sell to China and you don't sell to the United States, you're condemning yourself. The result is going to be that you're not going to sell a lot of tokens. Now here's an interesting thing. Who's heard of the Howey test, or the term Howey? There you go. This is a global topic of conversation also. There's people all over the world are trying to figure out if the tokens that they're selling as part of an ICO count as securities under US law, or what you can refer to as a utility token. So around the world, people are trying to figure out if the tokens they're selling are either utility tokens or securities. Okay, and the way you're nodding, because everyone's talking about this, but no one explains why or how you get to this result. Okay, the idea is that if your tokens you're selling are not securities, that they're not like stocks and they're not like bonds, then you don't need to worry about the SEC. Or if they are like securities, you do need to worry that they fall under the SEC. Now, I've seen again and again and again white papers and websites where they say, we've checked with a lawyer, or we checked with someone, and we're sure that these tokens we're selling are utility tokens. So don't worry, everyone. I'd say that's very risky, because normally you have people all over the world trying to figure out a law that even US attorneys don't necessarily understand, and claiming that they're absolutely sure. Who's heard of the Munchie case? This just happened in the US. There was a United States ICO that just got shut down because they claimed that their tokens were not securities, that they were utilities. There was actually a US lawyer who signed off on that idea. And the IRS called up this company and said, stop your ICO. English people, you got a free lesson. The fourth approach is to take a real strong look at what you're doing, understand it, and then if you can, access the United States market and raise more funds. So get a good idea about whether or not the tokens you're issuing are in fact securities or not, and no matter what, even if they are, handle it correctly, and sell into the United States. I'm just going to move fast here. So I'm going to kind of give you the verbal. The default rule in the United States is that if you're selling something that's a security, you need to what's called register it with SEC. So if something's a security under the 33 Act, you need to register it with SEC. Registering your stock or your token or whatever with SEC is complex and complicated, and it's generally something you don't want to have to do. The alternative is to find something called an exemption. So the default rule is that you need to register securities, and the alternative is that you need to find an exemption. And there's a classic series of exemptions in the United States that go under the name Reg D, which is Regulation D. And almost all those exceptions or exemptions rely on that you're not selling your tokens or your securities to just anyone. You're not selling it to some babushka who doesn't know any better and is spending her last dollar with you. Rather, you're going to be selling your tokens or securities to people who are sophisticated, who have money, who have advice, and they have guidance. And these people are referred to as accredited investors. So in the United States, if you're selling something that may be a security and you don't want to go through the whole registration process with the SEC, you can find an exemption, and most of these exemptions depend on the idea that you're going to sell to certain wealthy individuals that have good resources so that they can evaluate your securities and make intelligent decisions. So there's lots of online services now that will help you do this. If you look at the Filecoin ICO, Filecoin was very successful. They raised over $200 million, maybe $300 million, I'm not quite sure. That was a sale that was done in the United States of tokens that were securities. So Filecoin raised over $200 million in the United States. They used a platform called CoinList, and CoinList did KYC, it did AML. KYC is, of course, know your customer. They did AML, which is anti-money laundering, and they integrated with another service so that only accredited investors bought the tokens, and they successfully accessed all that US investment money. So it is possible to do it. Now, how do you know whether or not the token you're selling into the United States is a security? How do you know if you even have to bother with this or if you can just sell it? Well, there's a term in the 1933 Securities Act that says this act covers stocks and bonds and everything else, but it also covers something called an investment contract. Okay, that's a term you hear a lot, investment contract. If the token you're selling qualifies as an investment contract under the 1933 Act, then that rule about having to register the security or find an exemption applies. Okay, now what the heck is an investment contract? Okay, all around the world people are trying to figure out what an investment contract is. And the reason it's a tough question is that the 1933 Act, the US laws, uses the term investment contract, but it doesn't define what it means. So that's kind of a gift from the US government to the world. But there was a famous case in 1946 called SEC versus Howey. And the United States Supreme Court took up the issue, or took up the question of what actually is an investment contract. And when you apply what's called the Howey test to your tokens, you can make a pretty good guess about whether or not the tokens you're selling are securities under US law. And by the way, I'll point out that I've gotten a lot of recent exposure to Singapore's law, the law in the United Kingdom, the law that's being drafted in Gibraltar and elsewhere, and the rules that are in the United States They're very similar to the rules in other countries. Singapore's MAS just came out with a set of new rules about what are securities, what are investment contracts, and they're very, very similar to the United States rules. So we're beginning to see sort of a global legal system evolve when it comes to securities. Okay, so what is the Howey test? In order for a token you sell to qualify as a security, it has to, each one of these prongs, each one of these descriptions needs to be true at the top. If any one of these is not true, then you don't have a security under US law. So let's say you're selling a token. Okay. The first question is someone paying money for it? Or is someone giving up something of value for it? Now the normal case is yes. Normally it's like I have a smart contract, send my Bitcoin or Ethereum to this address and you'll get your tokens back. But what about if you're doing an airdrop? What about if you're just giving out tokens and you're not charging people for it? Is that automatically not within a Howey? It might not be. It might be the case that if you just airdrop your tokens or distribute them for no cost or just hand them out and they become valuable later, it's possible it's not a security. So that's under number one. Number two is, okay, fine. Suppose there is an investment of money. Is it into a common enterprise? Now, common enterprise basically means, is there one company, is there a Filecoin out there where it's running the show that makes the tokens worth something or not worth something? If there's not some common company out there that's issuing these tokens and making them valuable, then they're probably not securities. So for example, Bitcoin, okay, with the possible exception of Satoshi, no one runs Bitcoin. China doesn't even run Bitcoin, I think. So you can argue that Bitcoin is not a security because there's no common enterprise backing up Bitcoin. And in fact, the SEC basically admitted that recently. They kind of, back in one of the recent cases, they said, well, this company is trying to pretend that their token is a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, and therefore is not a common enterprise, but they're not being truthful because of X, Y, Z. In other words, the SEC admitted recently that Bitcoin is not a common enterprise and is therefore not a security. Also, the SEC came out with a report on July 25th of this year where they talked about the DAO, where they talked about Ethereum. They talked about this whole hack and the way the DAO fell apart and how it was structured. And they also pointed out that Ethereum is not a security under US law. Interesting, right? So it's not the case that every token, every security, it's not the case that every token or every cryptocurrency is going to be a security. If you have a truly decentralized network, if you have a truly distributed network and no one is in the center and they're in charge, it's probably not a security. Okay, number three, is there a reasonable expectation of profits? How many of you bought Ethereum when it was first issued? How many of you wish you had? I wish I had. I wish I bought Bitcoin 20 years ago before it was even made. A lot of people, when they invest in these crowdfunding ventures, they're not necessarily doing it to profit. Now, I think in real life today, people are buying these tokens to profit, but I think in the beginning, a lot of people funded these projects because they were interested in seeing the project develop. When Vitalik went out there and he published his white paper and they set up the foundation in Zug and all that other good stuff, clearly they were looking to make money. Clearly they were looking to profit, but I think that their vision was much more than that. And a lot of people who contributed to that project did so not just because of the expectation of profits, but because they wanted Ethereum to come to life. So if their primary motivation in buying the tokens is not to profit, but just to see the project happen. In other words, it's a Kickstarter project or it's a crowdfunding project. They just really wanted to come into existence or to use the product, not necessarily to sell the tokens for a profit, then it's less likely to be a security. And here's something else. The fourth prong is the profits derived primarily from the entrepreneurial or managerial efforts of others. In other words, if I'm the one owning a business or I'm partial owner of a business and I buy part of the business and I work on it myself, then I'm not relying on other people to make money for me. So that's not a security. Okay, so just to recap, each one of these 4 things must be true in order for a token to be security. If any one of these is not true, then you don't have a security, you don't need to register it with the SEC, and you don't need to find an exemption. Okay, so. And again, the SEC really hit this point on July 25th when they issued the report on the DAO. That report was interesting because the SEC asserted, something which is kind of obvious to me, which is tokens could be securities, which some people believe that, no, this is a whole new thing. You can't possibly be a security. Well, SEC said no. You know, if it's an investment contract under Howey, it's a security and we're going to deal with it. But they also said that not every token is a security and that they're going to apply the Howey test, and if they find an exemption, then you don't need to register it and you don't need to exempt it. That's right, D. So I'm going to go off the script for a minute. Who's heard of a SAFT? I think that's most of the room. So let's take one big step back. The whole idea behind an ICO is that, or the prior idea behind an ICO is that you have a really good idea in your mind, but you don't have enough money to make this idea that's in your mind come true. And in the old days, like 2 or 3 years ago, you would have to go find some venture capitalists or some rich people or some angel investors and say, please give me your money and I will build this platform for you. I'll build this neat thing. So Vitalik with Ethereum could have gone to venture capitalists and said, hey, give me some dollars, give me some US dollars so I can build this neat new worldwide virtual machine. That's the way things used to be done, right? But then you had the advent of Bitcoin and you had the advent of crowdfunding, and people with really good ideas, many of whom are in this room, said, I don't want to go talk to a venture capitalist. I don't want to give up all my company to get a few $1 million and lose control and be cheated and kicked out. I want to go to the world, conduct an ICO, get money, and then deliver my product to the world. So the fundamental idea, of course, is that you set up your smart contract, you get your Bitcoin and Ethereum, you issue tokens in response. Those tokens at the beginning are worthless, but then you build the system with the money you received, and then the tokens all of a sudden become valuable because they're useful. It's actually a really beautiful idea, right? It's kind of wonderful. It's almost as if you love really good wine, and you're paying for the wine far in advance at a really good discount, and you're letting the wine be grown and made and bottled, and because you're patient and because you took a risk, you're getting the wine for much less money than everyone else. And if you buy a whole bunch of wine and you can't drink it all, you sell the extra and make a profit. I mean, that's kind of what an ICO is. It doesn't have to be up on Ethereum. So it is a beautiful idea. Here's the wrinkle, and here's where SAFs come in. Suppose you have a token that really is a utility token. It really is useful. It's not just an investment, but it lets you use a service like Filecoin, or just to use my favorite one, or use some kind of distributed VPN product. It's not, you're not buying or issuing that token because you want dividends necessarily. You're promoting it and investing in it and making it happen because the service is useful. So imagine you have something that's truly utility token and not security. So what the heck is a SAFT? Why do you even need to deal with that? Well, it gets tricky, but the idea is that, yes, it's true. Once you have a working system, those tokens may really be utility tokens. They may not be securities. But in the period between when the startup gets those tokens and they build the platform that the tokens are going to be used on, The SEC now, and a big law firm called Cooley, is taking the position that those tokens, until this network is built, are securities. So think about that. You can have tokens which are eventually not going to be securities, but during the period while you're building the platform it's going to be used on, where Cooley and now the SEC is landing, is that for that period they are securities because they're not really usable. They're not really usable as utilities. And the theory is that people are buying those tokens not because they want the platform that's going to be built, with the money being raised by their sale, but that they're buying them because people want to speculate and resell them to others later on at a profit. Okay? So, and they may be right. Okay, a lot of people when they buy tokens now during the ICOs are not buying them because they want to fund the project. They're not like, ooh, EOS is so great. It's more like they're going for the profit. So how do you deal with that? Here's the idea behind a SAFT, and it's actually kind of useful. The idea is that, fine, if the tokens before the platform is built is a security, then we're going to treat them like a security. We're not going to issue the tokens, we're going to issue agreements for the tokens. SAFT stands for Simple Agreement for Future Tokens. So, what's your name?
Sergey.
Sergey. Gordon? So Sergey is very wealthy, and he is an accredited investor. And if I have an ICO and a new product, you would like to back my product, yes?
Why not?
Why not? I can think of a lot of reasons, but well, thank you, I appreciate that. So, you're not done. So, Sergey, I'm gonna do a background check on you. I'm gonna do KYC AML, and we're gonna, because you're wealthy, you're an accredited investor. You're gonna give me $1 million, thank you, okay? Just,
You're welcome.
yeah, but don't worry, it will be worth it. I hope so too. Okay? And rather than selling tokens to you now before they're useful, you and I are going to enter into a SAFT, a simple agreement for future tokens. And in that SAFT, okay, you're going to give me $1 million now, and I'm not going to give you the tokens now, but we're going to sign an agreement so that when the network is ready, you get the 1 million tokens. Because when you finally get the tokens, they're going to be utility tokens, and we don't have to register them with the SEC. But the SAFT we're going to sign is a security. The actual agreement is a security. So are you wealthy and smart, and do you have $1 million to spare?
If I don't have other ways too, why not?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. So everyone. So yes, sir. No, ask questions. Go for it.
I mean, just in this situation, it's just a simple forward contract which is used actually in the same way as when we are buying and selling the crypto, the logic
That's right.
is absolutely the same. So this is treated as a security because it's written. So you should explain.
Let me back up on that one. Okay, you've obviously dug into this. Yes, it is a forward contract. It's especially a forward contract for U.S. tax law purposes. Okay, but it's a great question, but I want to tease it out a little bit. But the reason it is a security, the reason is that it seems like the primary motivation of people when they enter into the SAFT, when they buy these tokens before the network, is the profit motivation. Okay, it's a little bit different. It's not because it's a forward contract, it's because before you've built the network, it seems to pass Howey. And how many people, okay, and Pavel's telling me I gotta cut it off. I'm happy to answer your questions. I wanted to move fast, and the weather was what it was, so I appreciate you guys sticking around, and that's it. Thank you.
Just need to leave the building soon. Всем спасибо. Гордон еще здесь. Если у вас есть вопросы по юридической части, он знает, как ответить и все такое. То есть спасибо, что пришли.
I'm happy to share all the slides. I'm happy to answer questions. If you add me on LinkedIn or Facebook, it's Gordon Einstein. And I think we're getting kicked out of the building, but I'll stand in this beautiful Kyiv weather and answer questions if you have questions. So, Pavel, Pash.
Thank you. Так.